Hello, my name is Donnie Piercey. I teach fifth grade in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'm the 2021 Kentucky State Teacher of the Year. One of the things that I'm big about incorporating into my classroom is podcasting, but not just podcasting for the sake of doing it, not just podcasting for the sake of saying, hey, we recorded a podcast. I learned very quickly when you start to incorporate apps and tools and bigger projects into that classroom, it's always important that you connect that project back to content. And one of the big things that as a fifth grade teacher, I feel like one of my most important jobs is to teach my students just the idea of storytelling and everything that goes into that. And we talk about how there's different types of stories. There's narrative stories, there's fiction stories, there's nonfiction stories, there's the kind of interview where you talk to somebody and you hear stories maybe from a veteran sharing some of their experiences. And so when we approach the idea of podcasting, I always talk to my students about how you need to start off with a plan. What is it that your podcast is going to be about? And what type of podcast is it going to be? A simple example, this past year, my students, we were listening to a podcast in our class called 6 Minutes. It's a narrative fiction podcast. Think like old school radio drama meets science fiction. It's kind of aimed at that fifth, sixth grade level, and my students fell in love with it. Especially since each episode was only 6 minutes long, it really played well to their attention span. But after listening to a few episodes, my students were hooked. And they wanted to not only keep playing the podcast, to keep going and wanting more and wanting to find more about the characters and the story. But the students, they slowly learned that really what they were doing was they were just connecting to the story itself. I took that as an opportunity to let them know that, just because we're listening to a podcast, this is something that you can create on your own too. So we started to record and create our own classroom podcasts. The students, they start off with a plan, they plan it out, they graph it, they get in groups, they talk about what kind of characters they want to have. We use examples from podcasts that we've listened to. We've talked about how, just like in books, there's different types of characters with character traits. Plan out just a rough outline of what their podcast is going to be. Second is we actually get to writing. What I found that's really beneficial, especially as a fifth grade teacher, it's important to put your students in collaborative groups with the writing part, because a lot of them, they might have that point where they're writing, just like we do as adults sometimes, where they kind of hit that wall. They're like, I don't know what to do next with this story. And when you have students in groups of 4 or 5, a lot of times they can kind of get over that writer's block to finish the story. And I always let my students know, hey, it's not going to be perfect the first time. We talk about how for many of them, this is the first podcast that they've ever written or recorded. And a lot of the podcasts that we listen to in class, like 6 Minutes, for example, that podcast, it's written by a professional writing crew, like out of Hollywood and Writers Guild. And it took years of practice to get to that point. So we talk about how the finished product that we have, it won't be perfect. And that's okay, because that's part of the process. After we write it, which again, that's oftentimes one of the most important parts, it then comes to the recording. And there's 1,000 different apps that you can use to record. I mean, we use one called Soundtrap because it's collaborative and the students can record and edit together. But we talk about the recording process. We talk about how, hey, sometimes we have that podcasting microphone, but sometimes all you have is just the microphone on your computer. What's important is the end result. Like when it's finished, have you told the story that you want to tell? The students go through the editing process. They start to add sound effects. I think of that one student in particular who said well, I don't really want to have a speaking part. I don't want to, sit there and make music. Can I be the editor? Can I be the one who goes back and at the end, crops out dead air, figures out how to add certain sound effects and finally put, the finished product in place? After we finish editing, we then publish it. And for some of our class podcasts, we have went and put it on an RSS feed. Because of the pandemic, we have not really had as much time to do that in the past few years. So we just talk about, hey, with a podcast, it's a recording. It's almost like screen-free entertainment. And we just take all of their MP3 files that the class records, we just throw them into a Google Drive folder, and the students can all listen. And we talk about how, it's important to be respectful to what your classmates create, because, hey, you might be listening to something that sounds great. And you might be listening to something that, hey, maybe the audio quality isn't great, but there's still a story there. So we're very supportive in our feedback. And again, it ultimately comes down to the idea of storytelling. And with students, when they've worked all year on figuring out the writing process, when they've worked all year on even just figuring out how to use an audio editing program and figure out how to remove dead air and little things like that, when they have that finished product, they really have that sense of accomplishment that as a classroom teacher is really all I ever want to see.